Okay, welcome to your ENGG1500 Week 5 lecture. This lecture is going to cover a whole bunch of different stuff, partly because there is a bunch of discrete topics that I want to bring together for you, and partly because some of these topics just have to be addressed at this point in semester for logistical reasons or whatnot, and we're going to just cover them today. So this is going to be a lecture in a whole bunch of different parts, all right? I'll timestamp it to help it make sense, but it's not like when we did engineering problem solving and it was 2 hours on one topic. This is going to be a bunch of different bits and pieces smashed together, okay? It's going to jump around a bit. There's going to be a little bit of a switching cost. Some bits will be related, some bits will not. We're going to try and tie them together, and I've got obvious points in the lecture that we're going to kind of come back to later and tie some concepts together. This is a lot of this when we're going to talk about teamwork and project management and all that kind of jazz is for exposure, not prescription. Basically, what I'm going to get at with some of the things I'm going to show you today, the goal isn't for you to memorize, okay, this is how I'm going to do teamwork, for example, for the entire rest of my life. All it's meant to be is, here are some things that are really useful for you to know and be able to deploy as an engineer when working in teams, or consider or look at these things from a different perspective, okay? So, particularly the first half of the lecture, it's not explicit, it's just information you should know. The second half of the lecture, when we jump into assessment tasks, that's the opposite. It's like, you must do this in this way, it's an assessment task, okay? Just wanted to kind of front end this. Sweet. I'm sorry if a couple of these slides, I pulled some of them from last year, so they might look a little bit disjointed because they're not in this style. So bear with me. If a little bit of this is a little bit clunky, I apologize. All right, so we're going to talk about teamwork and project management first. Okay, it's going to be the first big kind of content dump of the lecture. Then we're going to talk about assessments, and this is going to get kind of complicated because we're going to talk about them in a general sense. What is it like to set assessments? Why do I set assessments the way that I do? How should you as a student look at assessments generally in all of university to get the most out of them and the most marks from them? And then we're going to jump into the ENGG1500 assessments. We're going to look at the report that's due on Monday, your next two assessment tasks after that. And then, after we finish all the assessment stuff, we're going to talk about design thinking. And this is that divergent thinking process that I talked about in the week 3 lecture when we did the engineering method. And I said, we're going to do this divergent thinking. Often it's called brainstorming stuff. There's a thing for that as well. Okay, so that's all within today's lecture. Don't worry, none of it's particularly hard. There's just a lot of it. Before we jump in, just a few things about your workshops, and that's going to help contextualize some of the content that's coming. Is you need to understand that the way in which we teach you in your workshops as of week 5 is going to begin to drastically change. So I'm going to start treating you more and more like fully functioning engineering teams. And we've been working towards this, but now this is happening. You're a team of engineers and you've got a problem to solve and you're going to smash it, okay? And we aren't going to necessarily prescribe to you each week, hey, here's a lab for you to do, or here's an hour of lecture content for you to consume or whatever. It's going to just start to be, go work on your project. Our role ceases to be as much instructors, and me and my workshop leader's role starts to become more of a supportive and encouraging client. Okay? You're not expected to know absolutely everything at this stage. I understand that we've given you really rapid content dumps at the start of your lectures, sorry, the start of your project, and a lot of it might be a bit confusing. Feel free, you can come back to that. You can come back and ask us for help and stuff like that. It's just we're changing the way that we do our delivery. Just letting you all know, I'm super impressed with how well the teams are going this year. I'm really, really happy. I think we've progressed incredibly well through the first 4 weeks. Most of you are absolutely nailing it, and you should be exceptionally happy with how you're doing, particularly through your competencies and stuff. Last week, they went unbelievably well from my perspective. I thought they were excellent. So you might be sitting here thinking, oh, this is quite a lot going on all at once, and a bit of this is hard. I think you're absolutely nailing it, so well done. All right, let's talk teamwork. So, in general, I like to do this live in an audience and ask people, are they in general, and to you, are you in general, a fan of group work? in the past, when you've done group work, has it been overall a positive or a negative experience? Most people at this stage say it's been negative. Most people don't have the fondest memories of teamwork, particularly at university or at school. But if we want to be successful engineers, we're going to need to learn to work in large teams, right? Because there is no large-scale engineering project that is solved by a single individual. We have to work in teams. And we look at things like landing a gigantic rocket ship onto a drone boat. You're going to need hugely diverse teams. So, you know, you're not going to get away from working in teams in industry. It might change in the way that it happens a little bit, but essentially the skills that we learn here are going to be helpful for us forever. Now, you'll notice that I tend to use the term teamwork over group work. And it can be subtle, but I think that this is a very important distinction. It's predominantly why people don't like group work, but they do often like teamwork. I see a group as a bunch of people who are essentially equivalent, getting given a project. And I think the reason this is often done badly is because it's done for the wrong reasons. It's not a project that you're actually going to split up into individual tasks and give to specialists. That would be teamwork. It's just, here, all of you go and work on this together, and you'll basically all be dragged down to the level of the worst person in your group. Because you're not splitting it up correctly. And often it is done for the wrong reasons. It's done often to save marking load in schools. It is. It's done to save marking load. It's done to have less complexity and less things to manage, is to just put people into groups so we have to do less management. And sometimes that's a reality, and you're going to have to do that, and many of you will become managers later in life, and that is what you will do. But that is often why people don't like it, because it's deployed for the wrong reasons. But if we have a big project that can be split up into parts and it requires specialists, now teams start to become really useful things. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, full disclaimer here, you're going to get a bunch of sports analogies. You are, because it's where it makes sense. It's the easiest way to teach this stuff to people is to give them the sports analogies because it's obvious. Also, personally, that's my background. That's how I learned to be a good team member, was by playing competitive sports in teams. And that means I can lecture to you with authority on this because I have lived experience in this environment. If I was to concoct some artificial scenario that I'd never actually been part of, I wouldn't really have the ability to lecture passionately about that topic, right? So I'm sorry if you don't like the sports analogies, but that's where I'm going to do this from because that's my area of expertise. You don't have to understand them. And you don't have to like them. Just bear with me. They're just analogies. They're just there so I can help to get a point across. Okay? So, this is in the disclaimer section. There's no hard and fast rules here. I mentioned this before. These are concepts. These are ideas that might help you. I'm not prescribing this is the only way to work in a team. There's obviously thousands of ways to address this. This is one. This is my lived experience that I'm going to share with you today. So, I used to play League. I do not anymore. I am far too fat and far too slow, but I used to play Rugby League. And this is a team sport. And it's a sport where you absolutely need a team. As everybody in your team has different jobs to do. Now, I'm gonna super simplify this down into two different positions. One of them being front rowers. Front rowers or forwards, basically the people who do a lot of the tackling and getting tackled. So they're all about the big collision, all right? They're about somebody carrying a ball up, getting tackled, big, heavy collisions. And in order to do this, if we look at the mathematics behind it and the physical models behind what's going on here, who wins in the collision is generally we talk about conservation of momentum, okay? We don't talk about conservation of energy always in collisions. We'll generally talk about conservation of momentum, and your momentum is your mass times your velocity. So the more of that you have going into a collision, the more it dictates which way that collision kind of goes. And consequently, if you want to have a lot of momentum to win the collision, you want to have a lot of mass, right? You want to be big and heavy. And this just makes inherent sense. You want to run over people, you want to be bigger and heavier than them, right? So a front rower wants high mass. There's another position that we can play. Generally our backs, we call them People like our wingers, their job is to be fast and dexterous. So they're not there to have the big collision. They're there to duck and weave and get past people and not have the collision, right? So their whole job is around dodging. Now, if you want to be able to dodge, that means you want to have rapid accelerations. So if we know our formulas for acceleration, we know force is equal to ma. F equals ma, right? Force is equal to mass times acceleration. So acceleration equals force divided by mass. I want a high acceleration. I want a low mass. I want to shrink my mass. So a winger wants to be light so that they can do their job appropriately. And therein is the reason we need a team. Because I don't care how good you are at football. You can't be both heavy and light at the same time. It's just not how physics works, right? And you need both. If you stack a team full of one or the other, you'll lose. So if you stack a team full of front rowers who are great at collisions, one fast winger will just carve through all of them and they'll score all the time. If you go the other way and you pack a team full of fast wingers, one big heavy guy will just crush them all. So you can't win by min-maxing your entire team. You need balance. And you need specific people to min-max certain, to really go down one of the options. Yeah? And thus, we require a team. Everybody has a job and everybody needs to know what their job is and they need to do their job. That's how we be successful. A lot of this makes sense. None of this is hopefully particularly confusing to you unless, you don't know it, you've never seen football before, and that's not a bad thing. But this analogy expands beyond playing rugby league, so you see it all the time in other sports like cricket. You'll have batters and bowlers, same deal. You generally want different physical attributes or at least skill sets in those two roles. Netball's the best. Netball is by far the best example for this because you have all these different positions. They're super well-defined positions in netball, and not only may you require different skill sets for these different players, they're physically only allowed to set foot on certain parts of the court. So you have to have team members to be successful here, right? Because you're only allowed in certain areas. So, that's probably the best example is netball of why we need to have team members. It works outside of our physical sports into our online competitions as well. So I used to play quite a lot of Dota, and there we talk about carries and supports and mids and offlaners and all that kind of jazz. When I played WoW, we used to talk about tanks, DPS, and healers. And I play D&D now, and we talk basically the same thing, right? It works in those types of fantasy teams as well. We see it all over the place. And whenever we look at these things, we're looking at people with skill sets that are complementary to each other and sometimes just outright contradictory. That would be our heavy and our low weight people, like the high mass and low mass people. That's a contradictory skill set. You can't have both no matter how skilled you are. But more often, we're looking at complementary skill sets, people who are better at different things, filling different roles. And if we do this, if we can bring together teams where people can cover each other's weaknesses, we can start to solve problems that are outside the scope of any one human being. Teamwork allows us to solve problems bigger than ourselves. You may remember this slide from last week where we talked about communication allows us to solve problems bigger than ourselves. And these two things go hand in hand, right? We communicate with other people such that we can form effective teams, such that we can do things more impressive than any one person on earth will ever be able to do, right? And that's the reality of your life as an engineer. All right. Second disclaimer, I should definitely say disclaimer 2. Complementary roles are important. That's true. I'm not disclaiming that. And specializing into a particular role can be useful. But very rarely in teams is it as clear-cut as I have made it out in my example. Most of the time, team roles problems are complex, the teams that need to be formed are complex, and the roles in those teams are complex, okay? Very rarely can we define a team role by something as simple as you need to be heavy. It's generally more complex than that, and people are generally adaptable. Human beings can often adapt and adjust themselves to fall into different categories and play different roles quite successfully. So don't feel that you ever need to be limited into oh, I am like this and thus I can only fill this type of role. That's not true. It's more, I need to fill this type of role. I need to push these particular attributes more and maybe hold back on some of the other attributes. All right. You're a human being. You can adapt. Yeah. Awesome. I used to play both front row and wing, by the way, just if you're interested. They were the two positions that I was most commonly picked to play. Um, and I used to adapt. I used to play differently when I was picked to play one role than picked to play another. Changed my style. I adapted to my situation to be a good team member. Awesome. So, again, I hope none of this is particularly earth-shatteringly new to you. I say this and most people are sort of looking at me a bit funny going, yeah, man, we're at university, we understand. And I say to them, okay, cool, fair enough. When was the last time in a school environment or a work environment you actually applied teamwork strategies to what you're doing? And they all kind of go, what? I go, well, most people hate group work. Fair, fine, okay, whatever. Do you look at that as though you are a team, and do you acknowledge the role each person is playing in your team? What position are they playing? What is their job? You know, what? Well, that's something that we always do it. We always whinge about it, and I'm the same. I do it as well. But I always forget to kind of just go back and go, well, hold on. We're a team. What role are we playing? What is this person's job? What is my job? And if we do that, we often find that we can function as much better teams both in the workplace and through our education as well. There's no way I could possibly do my job alone. I knew that I was going to need a team when I started 1500, and my team's sort of 20 to 30 people strong. Depends on the year, it varies a little bit, and exactly who you decide to include in my team. But I've got a fairly substantial team that helps me run 1500. Some of them are the people you see, like workshop leaders and stuff like that, but I've got other people who help me with admin and people I use for teaching pedagogical reasons, teaching reasons, where I check stuff like that. So I've got this big team, right? And everybody has a different role. They've been deliberately handpicked by me to sit in a particular role in the team, and that's why we function so unbelievably well as a team, because we were picked to be one from the start. I adopted all of these types of policies that I'm teaching you today to build my 1500 team. Now, some of these people are picked because of their technical capabilities, and a lot of that is your workshop leaders. They are partially or largely or entirely picked because they're a specialist in software engineering, and I know very little about software engineering. So I had to pick people who were technically experts in a particular area because that was a skill set I was lacking. Great. But a lot of them are also picked based on their personalities. Okay, so we're picking for complementary skills technically, but I'm also picking people for complementary personalities to me. Sometimes I want a person in the room who's got a big, boisterous personality like I do, so we can butt heads and we can kind of really test things out in a rigorous way. But other times I pick people who are going to be quieter, more reserved, more calm and calculated, and they're going to make sure that we get little things right and we don't forget things. So teams being picked both on technical capability and on personality are important. Okay. This is just one example of how I applied this type of logic of building a football team, for example, into my work. And it was really successful. Cool. So that was kind of a conceptual introduction to teamwork. Let's get into some of the details of how you will see this in industry. If we look at teamwork in industry, there is a whole bunch of science around this. Some of it's soft science, some of it's real psychology. I'm going to start with a bit about me. This is so me. I am a starter. I am a blue sky, green field, let's start a new thing, see how it goes type of person. I am so not a finisher. I know this about myself. And there are people who are like this, and then there are people who are totally different to this, right? If you look at what are called the Belbin team roles, and I'm going to put a link in the description to their website, go check them out. I've stolen a few photos for this. These are really common in industry, Belbin team roles. And essentially what they have is 9 different positions that you can play in like an engineering team or any project management team. Okay? So I know this might be small and hard to read. Please go and have a look at the link if you want to see a whole heap more detail. I'm going to pick apart a few little bits of this. But it essentially says, like there's front rowers and there's wingers and there's halfbacks or whatever, there's also these 9 roles in professional teams. And you can play one of them, right? And different people are good at different ones. So if we pick just a couple, this is just a quick zoom in of a few of them. There's coordinators who are kind of like people who you would generally consider a good manager. So somebody who collects people together, issues instructions, is good with timelines, that type of stuff, may be really good at playing the position of coordinator. Somebody who's like a technical genius might be your specialist, right? That's your PhD level, technical, knows all of that, can't put their shoes on the correct feet in the morning, but, is brilliant, mad scientist at what they do. They might be really great at playing a specialist. And then you might have complete a finisher, the thing that's super not me, right? I'm terrible at playing this role. I'm all about starting the new thing and moving on, so I deliberately pick people in my teams who are good completed finishers because I know I'm bad at that. So different team roles that you can play. And there's 9 of them there that they believe make up a good team. I don't necessarily understand the difference between all 9 of them sometimes. I don't fully prescribe to this. I prescribe to the concept of having different people play different roles. I don't necessarily prescribe to their 9, but hey, these are really common in industry, so I think that you should know what they are. You can fit different roles, different amounts. So this is generally how this works, is you pay Belbin some ungodly amount of money, which most industries are more than happy to pay. And they give you a personality test, and they ask you these questions about what types of things you would like to do or how you would perform in certain scenarios. And as a result of that, they can then compile kind of this personality matrix for you that says how well you will at least enjoy or how good you would be at certain positions. So this is just one of them that they give you on their website for their free example. And you can see that whoever this particular person was really good at playing the shaper, the coordinator roles. Less good at playing things like the specialist. So if I was building a team and I surveyed a bunch of, gave a bunch of people these tests and I could get their results back and I got this person's results back, I'm making them a manager. They're a shaper, they're a coordinator, right? They are a manager. What they are not is an expert. They're not going to play the specialist role. So, cool. They've got administrative and management roles. So get somebody who's the exact opposite of this. Their specialist is really high and their coordination's really low. Great. Cool. That's fine. I'm bringing them in as a technical expert at a particular subject. And I'm going to need to pair them with somebody like a manager if I want to be successful, because the manager needs the technical expertise and the specialist needs the coordination, or they're not going to be useful. So you can do this to deliberately structure teams to fit specific purposes. Can build really efficient teams this way. Yeah, okay. I think we've covered this. We're looking to cover each other's weaknesses. That's kind of the whole point of this. I really like the Belbin stuff because it does strengths and weaknesses. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this particularly well, but for every role that they have, they've got the specialist and they've got the things that they're going to be good at, the strengths, and they've got the things that you need to allow them to be bad at. If you want to have a specialist, you need to allow them to tend to contribute on only a narrow front and dwell on technicalities, because that's their job, right? So if you want them to be real good at this, they're going to be real weak at this, and so you need to be prepared for that. So that's the thing that I like most about Belbin. Not that it tells you what they're good at, but it tells you what they're bad at, so you can build correspondingly amazing teams. Cool. So you'll see these in industry in some way, shape, or form at some stage in your life. I like them because they highlight strengths and weaknesses. I think that's the most important aspect of building a powerful team. You will need to know how to work with these people because you'll be put with them. So sometimes people will get upset because the person that they're working with doesn't know anything technical and all they want to do is admin stuff. Yeah, they were probably deliberately put with you because you don't do any of the admin and you only do the technical, so you're a specialist and you needed help, right? So you need to learn to work with both the people who have the same skill sets as you and the people who have the different skill sets as you, so you can work harmoniously with them and be successful. Know what you are, know what your job is, and know what your weaknesses are. because no matter what you do, you're going to have weaknesses as a result. Know what they are so you'll know what will upset people about working with you so you can address that before it becomes a problem. Know how to help people work with you. Yeah, cool. I will tell people quite a lot. I'm big, I'm boisterous. Don't get scared of me. Tell me to shut the hell up when I'm rambling. I'm perfectly okay with you telling me these things. I know that because I look at my own weaknesses as a team member. What I don't like about the Belbin roles is I don't think that they're very good around adaptation. They kind of prescribe what you are and where you should fit, and I find it difficult because depending on the situation, sometimes I'm a specialist because I have a PhD and stuff, and depending on the situation, sometimes I'm a manager coordinator because I run a big team of people. So I think Belbin's a little bit flawed in that way. I also think it's a little bit flawed to kind of show to students because the example I used is, I would hire somebody into this role or I would hire somebody into that role to plug this hole in this team. If you're four people working together in a team, how does it help you? It's not as useful once you've been put in a team. It's really good for assembling teams. It's less useful once you're in a team, with the exception of sometimes it lets you know, okay, we have four people with the same personality in this team. We're going to have some issues. Regardless, communication is key. You want to be successful in a team? Communicate. Communicate what you are, what your weaknesses are, what you need help with. Your team will be successful. Cool. So that's Belbin, and that's one way of looking at teamwork, of which there are hundreds. We're going to do two. We just did Belbin. Now we're going to do hats. Let's talk about hats. So this is another thing that's super common in industry, and that's why I'm showing it to you. And it's a teamwork thing again, but it sort of tackles the problem in a different way. The way this one works is says there are 6 different types of hat that you can wear that define your role within a team. And anyone can wear any hat at any time. So it's more about adaptation. It's about deliberately going, okay, I'm going to black hat today, which is negative. Why is this going to happen? What's going to go wrong? How can this thing break? What's the worst thing that can happen? Will anybody die? Then you might want to take your black hat up and put your green hat on, which is all about creativity. Okay, how can we tackle this problem in a way that nobody's ever looked at it before? Is there something unique and amazing that we can do? And then you might go into white hatting, which is, what facts do we have? What facts do we need to move forward? Can we prove any of these things? And there's blue hatting for management style. That's our coordinating. What are our goals? What are our objectives? What order are we going to do them in? Who's assigned to what? We've got yellow hatting where we go all about positivity, all right? You're there, if you're going to be yellow hatting, you're like, cool, no, this is going to work. We're going to make this work. I got a kick-ass team. We got a kick-ass project. We're going to be awesome today, and you're there to bring the positivity up. Can we do this? I don't know. It's going to be really hard. Yeah, but we're really awesome. We're going to do this, and you can push through things, right? And then finally, we can go red hatting where we go emotional. What is our first emotional response to these things? Hey, do you like this design? No. Why not? Don't know, but I don't like it. Do you have any reasons? No. Oh, I love that one though. Don't know why, but man, I get excited about that one. Okay. This is human-centered design in a hat, right? Remember when we talked about doing our design process? And we talked about human-centered design? You might have everything technically correct, with which you did white hatting and black hatting generally is how you get technically correct. Your red hat is, what about the human being who's going to be interacting with my thing? What do they care about? That's why we want a red hat. So basically, it's in this case, you've got 6 different roles you can play in a team, and you can deliberately take hats off and put different hats on. So this has a lot of really strong benefits. Depending on where you are in the process, so say, in your ENGG1500 teams, you're generally teams of 3 or 4 people. And there's 6 hats to wear here, but you don't necessarily want them all on all at once. When you're doing something like scoping a problem, you probably want to have team members wearing white hats, which is factual. What numbers do we have? Can we get a quote for that? How big, how small, how many, whatever. You probably want green hats on going, okay, how are we going to look at this problem? What do we need to know? What if we tackled it like this versus tackling it like this? What will we need to know there? How else could we solve it? How can we break our solution space open? And you probably want blue hats. Who's on what? When does this need to be due? How long do we have? Yeah, so you can see how those three hats might be really useful when you are at the scoping stage. But when you go into, say, a divergent thinking stage and you want to be creative and you want to come up with new ideas, we want to change some of those hats. We don't need a white hat and a blue hat anymore. Those two things are useless to us. So our team members who previously had our blue hat on might take that off and they might put a yellow hat on. And now they're all about positivity. Let's go, guys. We can do this. This is going to be awesome. Or maybe they're playing the role of the person using it, that human-centered design aspect. Then they've got their red hat on, right? And you could do this all by yourself, or you can have a super adaptable team which can switch roles. I really like this because it clarifies your job. If everybody in your team knows you're black hatting, then your job is to black hat. It's to be the questioning. It's to play devil's advocate. It's to poke holes in things. And everybody knows that. So you're not being an asshole, you're black hatting. And it's difficult to make sure that you do it correctly. But if everybody's communicated that and they know, then you can do that. And you've got a really clearly defined job and you can stop. You go, all right, I'm taking my black hat off now. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm putting a different hat on. We're moving on. It's really nice to have that clarity in a role. Where it's hard is doing that is hard, okay? Switching between roles quickly is very difficult, particularly if it doesn't come naturally to you with your personality. Different personalities fit these hats differently, like they wear them a little more comfortably than others. And being able to switch between them, the mental load of that is difficult, particularly for people who are new at it. Okay, so I like hats. I think hats are great, and I do it all the time. Saying I'm putting my black hat on now is an expression I use all the time. I wear my black hat more than any of the others, but I think this is really good in a lot of ways, but it can be difficult for young people to pick up. Cool. Again, I think I mentioned this in quite a lot more detail earlier. I did have this backup slide for it in case I didn't do it particularly well, but as an engineer, you'll be required to fill more than one role, okay? You will need to be able to sometimes fill a particular role in a team and then leave that team and go and fill a different role in another team. You may not be comfortable with all of them. Too bad, get over it, okay? Sometimes you're going to want to be a specialist, but you're in a room with 4 people with PhDs and they all know more than you. Get over it, become an administrator, because that's what your team needs. And the more you do it, the better you will get. The better your ability to adapt, the better you can fit the role in your team that's required of you, the better your team's going to be. Okay? It is hard. I'm not denying that. Practice it, get better at it. Awesome. Okay. I think I got a couple big funny slides to get a bit lighter. Oh, no. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. This is the one that always comes up. Some people are sitting there going, we haven't thought about this at all. Or are we doing it wrong? No, not at all. Not at all. These aren't rules. These are just some ways of looking at the problem. If your team is functioning, if you're making really good progress and you haven't even thought about any of this, who cares? Don't worry about it. Don't rock the boat. If it's working, leave it alone. Okay? Teams evolve naturally. You don't need to stress. If things start to have issues, now you know some things you might want to look at though. If you're starting to get some cracks in your team, you can't build momentum, you keep butting heads with somebody, maybe have a look at your team dynamics and go, hold on, we're all wearing black hats at the same time. No wonder everybody's pissy. Somebody needs to take the black hat off and put a yellow hat on and build up a bit of morale in the team, yeah? So it's really good for you to look at if you're having issues within your team, and it's also good in the future when you want to build teams up and you have that opportunity to go, who do I want to work with? Then you can look at this stuff. But again, if your team's kicking ass, keep kicking ass. All right, so this is something that I got when I did a bit of this sort of training a while ago, was how do you build high-performing teams? So they have a pyramid, and this pyramid is essentially the 4 things that are required to get a high-performing team which can produce results. So take a couple of seconds, pause it. If I would encourage you to pause the video here and just think about it. What are the 4 pillars or the 4 layers, 4 foundational mechanisms required for a team to be successful? And what do you think? And roughly what order do you think they go in? But the opinion of this person who taught this to me was, number one, and I totally 100% agree with this, is trust. You cannot have a high-performing team if your team members don't trust each other. They need to trust that they're in a safe space. They need to trust that their team has their back more than anything else. If they don't trust their team has their back, they're not going to perform. All right? 100% the thing you've got to do is build trust. And this is not easy. Okay? This takes time and it is difficult. And it is one of the reasons why you get a competency to do as a team so early in ENGG1500. Because it makes you rely on your team members, and until you've had to rely on them, it's hard to trust them. But once you have relied on them, you start to build trust. 100% the most important thing in a team is trust. So if you're not trusting your team members, or you're not creating a safe space where they can trust you, you will not be able to make a high-performing team. Above that, interestingly, is conflict. And something that we've sort of danced around but we'll address specifically here is we want teams to come into conflict with each other, because that means you're pushing each other to be better. Okay? So you want to have different ideas in your team. You're not clones of each other. You're not a group. You're not all exactly the same. You're all different. You all have specialities, which means you should be occasionally going into conflict. How you manage that and how you do that successfully such that that conflict produces positive outcomes, really important. Okay? So if people can trust each other, then they'll feel confident to voice their opinion, even if it contradicts somebody else's, and they'll feel that they can have a discussion rather than an argument, and they can produce better results. Above that, the next two I'm going to kind of tie together: commitment and accountability. So are your people committing to your teams? And as a result, what are they accountable for? If you don't understand somebody's level of commitment, you can't issue them tasks and make them be accountable for things, right? It has to go in this order. We have to get our level of commitment known first, then our level of accountability. And I say our level of, not for a specific reason. There is not inherently anything wrong with saying in a team, I'm here to get 51% and get out. As long as you're honest about your level of commitment, your team can perform well. Now, its objective might not be to get 100%. Its objective might be to get 51% and get out of here or whatever. But it's really important for people to know that. Understand the level of commitment. Most arguments I settle between teams is a disparity in commitment. Somebody going, oh, I want to get 100%, and somebody going, I want to get 50%, and then them arguing about it. And it's because they never bothered to take each other's level of commitment into consideration. Just because you want to get 100% doesn't mean that anybody else in your team is obligated to work as hard as you. They're obligated to work as hard as they want to work. All right? You have to understand that, and then you have to be accountable for whatever parts you need to be accountable for. Cool. So if we do all of that, we will be able to produce very high-performing, very exceptional teams. We're starting to get towards the end of these types of slides. Something to take away from here is it is far more important, no matter what, after everything I've just said, the most important thing is that you work together as one team. All right? You will have disagreements about what direction that your team should go in and how it should work and what it should optimize around. And I entirely encourage you to have healthy debate about that. But it is far more important that an entire team is heading in one particular direction than what that direction actually is. The unity is more important than the direction. None of this means you should give up. None of this means if you don't agree, you shouldn't voice that opinion. But if you get outvoted or overturned or whatever, you take that in your stride and you go, all right, cool, I disagree, but we're now all heading in the same direction. And if you don't do that, your team will crush you, okay? You will not be able to survive one person pulling against the entire rest of the team. To jump back to a sports analogy here, this is a scrum in rugby union, where they have real scrums, not like rugby league. So this is a bunch of people They're all the forwards. They're all the big, heavy people pushing against each other, trying to push the other team backwards. All right. To really kind of pull this analogy apart, this is something that's actually been studied in quite a lot of depth by a whole bunch. There's papers you can write on. There's papers you can read that people have written on analysis of scrums. It's a really important part of the game. What this study is that you're currently seeing some data from is a study, I think it was done in New Zealand, unsurprisingly, where they got 7 different rugby union teams, looked at each of those teams, tested each player individually about how hard they could push in this scrum environment, and then looked at how hard the scrum as a whole, so the team as a whole, could push. And some of this is kind of obvious. So if we look at team 1, then this is stacked by the strongest team. They have a big, heavy pack, so they're big, heavy, strong people. And they had a really strong scrum push, yeah? Higher than anybody else. Makes sense. And if you took each one of those people and you tested them individually, and then you added up all of those numbers, it was also very high. None of this is surprising. All of this makes total sense. If we then go and look at the next highest sum of individual forces. So you could say here, team 1 had the strongest members in it. Where's the team that had the second strongest members in it? They're actually down here. This is the second strongest sum of individuals, and yet it was the second weakest team. Why? Because they weren't all pushing in the same direction. They were pushing against each other. They're strong individuals, but they weren't a strong team. In fact, you can see the third strongest team, so the third strongest sum of individuals, actually the third weakest team. So it is very important that you both acknowledge how good you are as an individual, but how well you're fitting into your team. Because if you're not fitting into your team, you're not helping, right? Good teams beat great players all the time. Cool. Okay, so a few things that I haven't covered yet that you might notice are kind of conspicuous that I've left out. I haven't spoken about team leaders yet. And I also haven't spoken about how to handle disputes when you have conflict. And I'm going to talk about those two things now. Most of the time, these two things are done right at the start when a team is formed and everybody's happy and nobody really knows each other. And they're all done as these nice smiling handshake agreements. And they're totally useless and they're done like that. Because you don't need these things when everything is going well. You need them when everything is going badly, right? So, team leaders have a particular role in a team. There is something that they do, and it is so not the person who organizes meetings and tells people when to show up and what their tasks are and keeps everybody on track. That is not a leader at all. That is an admin assistant, okay? At the highest level, fair enough, that's a chief operating officer maybe. But that's what that is. That's admin roles. What a leader is, what a leader does, leader takes blame. That's what they do. Okay? A leader is the person who will go, I'll put my ass on the line for this, and when it all explodes in everybody's face, I'm the one who will cop the blame for it. That's what your leader does. Okay? They take blame and they give credit out when they take blame when things go wrong. They give credit out when things go right. Okay? This is what a CEO does. This is what a CEO should do. I know it's not what all of them do, but this is what a good CEO does. They give trust to people. All right? They mediate our conflicts to make sure that we're being productive with them. They support the people in committing to the best of their ability. If somebody needs different timings or different tasks or different whatevers to allow them to commit, then the leader is the person who does all the background work to make sure that somebody can commit. And they manage our accountability. We look at our people. We look after them. We see who's shouldering too much burden and who we need to go and help out so that they can be okay and sustainable for long terms. This is what a leader does, to not give homework to people, okay? And that's not something that you generally need in an ENGG1500 team. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me for you to have team leaders. You can have them, and it's fine, and it does help some groups of people to nominate a team leader, even if that is just an admin person, and maybe it helps, and maybe a leader evolves naturally, and that's just your dynamic, and that's great if that happens. But I don't think appointing one because Dylan said you have to appoint one is particularly a good idea. Where I do think they're important though is each task that you have. So you take your whole project, you break it up into tasks. We're going to build this thing today, or we're going to code this thing, or we're going to assemble this, or I'm going to upload this to the server. Each one of those tasks should have a person in charge of it. So each task should have a leader. But your team as a whole doesn't necessarily need to have one. And that's then, if we give each task a leader, how we settle disputes. So generally, the best way to settle disputes is to make sure that one person has more to lose than everybody else, and that person's the one who makes the call whenever there's a dispute, okay? So I don't make balanced teams, ever. If I'm going to put two people on a task, I still give charge to one of them, and then the other person is there to support them. Even if the workload's 50-50, it doesn't matter. You give that tiny little bit of extra responsibility to one person, and that way, whenever there's a call where two people are butting heads, that person makes the call. We know who that is, and we don't have any conflict. Nobody gets upset. And that's the person who goes down with the ship then. All right. If it's wrong, that's the person who carries the can for it, the person who made the call. And then that takes away all of the dramas. Go, look, I disagree, but you're the one holding the can on this at the end of the day, so we'll go with what it is that you want to do. And your disputes generally get resolved pretty much immediately then. The person who makes the call shoulders the consequences. Your workloads can still be a fair split. It doesn't mean that the person who makes the call has to do most of the work. In fact, a lot of the time they don't do very much work. They just take responsibility, and that's perfectly fine. So if you're in a team and it's not your responsibility and you disagree, make your case. A good team should manage that conflict well, but when time comes to make a call, you fall in line or you quit and don't come back. They're your only two options. You do not stay in that team going, I told you so, I told you we should have done it this way, whatever. Don't be there. Quit and leave if that's how you're going to be. Okay? Cool. Awesome. I'm going to show you how to template this up later. So when we actually get into assessments, we are going to teach you how to split your task up into bits, and we're going to nominate a leader for every bit. And so you're going to see a really, really simple way to do this that you can carry forward forevermore. Okay, now we get some funny pictures. Just on conflict resolution, yes, conflict is good, debate is good, healthy debate is good, but engineers can get stuck debating tiny meaningless things for forever, because honestly, it's a thing that we enjoy doing generally more than a lot of admin and stuff like that, is having discussions. Be careful that you don't get stuck for 4 hours having a discussion that actually doesn't matter that much. The other thing is, in life, and I'm hoping this never happens in your engineering teams, but it will certainly happen to you in your life at some stage, is you'll get into debates and discussions about people who have no idea what the hell they're talking about, and you can't talk to them, all right? Don't argue with a stupid person. They'll bring you down to their level and beat you with experience, right? So sometimes you've just got to, cool, fair enough. I'm letting it go and I'm walking away, because you're not actually making progress anymore at that stage. And it happens, and we're sad when it happens, but sometimes we just got to get over it and let it happen. All right, I think I've covered this, but I just want to do this explicitly so you understand it for your ENGG1500 teams. My main rule for you to be a good team member is everybody contributes. That's all you have to do. You have to show up to class every week, and you have to try. You may not be brilliant, that's fine, but you have to show up every week and you have to try. If you can't make a class, it's going to happen. Life is going to happen, all right? Emergencies are going to happen. You're going to miss a class. You need to let your team know in Discord. And most people have been really, really good with this so far this year. I'll walk into a class and be like, there's only 3 of you here, aren't you a team of 4? And they'll go, yeah, so-and-so messaged us last night. They said they weren't feeling well. If they weren't in by this time, it means that they're still sick. They've sent me all of the things that I needed. Great. That's amazing. That's being a great team member. That's fine. So emergencies are fine. Life is going to happen. Don't come to work if you're sick, but get into the Discord or email or whatever and help your team, because the amount of work doesn't go down. It just needs to be shouldered by less people if you're not going to bother showing up. All right. And that's just totally not fair. It very rarely happens, but in 2 or 3 teams a year, I will take marks from a team member who never showed up and I will give them to somebody who worked every day. Okay? I can do it and I will do it, and I never like to do it, but if a team isn't functioning, I have absolutely no problem supporting the people who show up. Awesome. So closing out this, we need to work in teams. Actually, I put this on this slide as well. We need to work in teams. They allow us to break huge, big, complex problems up into manageable parts. If we want to be a good team member, we need to know what makes us, what we're good at and what we're bad at. So if we know our own faults, people can work with this easier. We need to know that to be a good team, people are going to disagree with us, and that's fine, and we want to use that to make us better. We need to remember that we've got to trust each other, or we're never going to be successful. Okay, so at a higher level, let's say we've got a really big project and we need to manage this. We're going to split it up into maybe teams of teams of teams of people in order to do a big project, like your ENGG1500 project, for example, or much, much, much larger land rockets on Mars projects. Then we get into the field of project management. And this is an entire world, all right? So in project management, this is entire careers for engineers. Lots of engineers become project managers. There, you will do an entire course, ENGG1500, in 3rd year with the wonderful Warren Riley, absolute greatest lecturer I've ever seen in my life. Will teach you, hopefully he'll teach you. He teaches 3500 at the moment. It's amazing. You'll learn heaps of stuff, an entire course. And then if you really love it, you can go on and do a whole master's of project management. It's a master's level thing. So this is a huge, huge topic. And we're going to smash through it in like 15, 20 minutes. Just want to teach you some key core skills. So, just like the teamwork stuff, there are no laws of physics here. There are commonly accepted practices, there is debate, there is disagreement about which ones we should use, and I'm just going to show you some. I'm not prescribing that you absolutely should follow all of these things. So, if we want to talk project management, let's talk that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So, let's say we've got some huge project like building ancient Rome. We want to take our big project and we want to break it down into smaller, more manageable bits, right? So the first question is, how do you take your big task and break it into bits? Because there is generally multiple ways to do this. We could take the city of Rome that we're going to build and look at it and go, all right, let's build all the services, all the aqueducts, all the roads, all the buildings. Okay? We could do that. That could work. And split into 3 teams, and we're going to build those 3 things. Or we could go, let's look at this the other way. Let's build a city center, and then let's build a series of self-contained suburbs around that. And then each team, if you're on building suburb 1, you will build the roads, the aqueducts, the buildings in that, and another team can be on suburb 6 doing those 3 things as well. And that's 2 totally different ways of breaking up the problem. So you got to look at what the best way to break it up. And there is often many, many, many ways to break down a complex problem. Cool. Then we want to look at order. So once we've broken them up, is there any order that's particularly important? Is it more useful to build the roads first before we try and build the buildings? Probably, yeah. Is there some order that this is important to? If we broke it up the other way, do we want to build the city center before we build the outlying suburbs so it's easy to get in? Maybe, yeah. Okay, so some parts will become easier if you do them in a particular order. So we want to figure out what bits we want to break our problem into. We want to figure out what order we need to address those bits in. And then we want to figure out what resources we need. So are we looking for stone to do this? Ancient Rome actually made their own bricks inside of the city because it made their life easier for them. That was resources, right? You've got resources like people and stone and gold and all those sorts of things to manage to be successful in our projects. What resources do we have? What resources do we need? And then how, particularly relating back to our what order do these things have to go into, what bits are up to where? Do I need this to finish before I can start that? Do I know how long this is going to take? Do I know where it's up to? How far through building the roads are they? And you can see when this blew out to something the size of an entire city, managing where all your resources is up to can be really quite hard. So this is where project management kicks in. And the most common example you will see of this, and it's kind of the end goal, so we're going to jump all the way to the end and then we're going to kind of backtrack as we learn this stuff. It is Gantt charts. So this is a snapshot of a big complicated thing called a Gantt chart. Don't worry about the complexity, I just want you to see it. What it's got is a series of tasks, okay? So this is tasks, install drywall. Oh, sorry. This is a Gantt chart for like a building, I believe. So task is install drywall. That's like the gyprock walls. And then paint and wallpaper, install cabinets, finish plumbing. All right. So if we just pick this bit here, install drywall, takes 2 days. It's going to start on this date. And then it gets sort of shown graphically here. And then after that, this is put the drywall on the walls. After we finish that, we're going to take another 2 days and we're going to put the drywall on the ceiling. Okay. And after we do that, we can kind of come down here and we can tape all that drywall up and then we can start painting it. All right. So what we're getting to see here is the tasks, how long they take, what order they need to go in, and what depends on what. So we call it dependencies. We need to paint it. Well, okay, before we paint it, we've got to tape it up. Well, before we can tape it up, we've got to install it. Yeah. And then what we get when we put all of this in, and we put all of the dependencies in, because there's other tasks as well. We need to do this on the first floor, and then we need to go and do it on the second floor too. What you do is you put all of these tasks in, you put all of their dependencies in, and you pay a huge amount of money for some bit of software that automatically then spits out what's called a critical path. And that is the absolute minimum time you can complete the project in. And it's based on following through these dependencies that come one after one another. You'll have other tasks like installing the drywall on the second floor that apparently aren't critical paths. If this starts a day later or takes a day longer than expected, doesn't matter, the project will still get done in the same time. But if taping the floor takes an extra day, absolutely everything else here will be pushed back by a day. So this is critical that you don't mess any of these things up. It's called your critical path. So having one of these allows you to take an enormously complicated process, visualize it graphically, find your key aspects, and monitor where you're up to in it. So that particular Gantt chart was showing time and activities. This one is showing the same thing. It just looks a bit different. Time and activities. Everything's got start dates, end dates a lot of times. But it also has budget. Okay, it has a cost for each of these things. So Gantt charts can also show us where we're up to in our spend. Okay, how much of our money have we used? So we can now monitor with them tasks, the resources that we need, the money that we need. You can label each of those tasks with a person, an employee, or whatever, so you can monitor your people with them. Time, money, people, budget, everything. You can put all of that onto one big graphical interface that people can read relatively easily. So that's what we want. As project managers, the end of the day, our job is to improve the efficiency of our projects, and it's to do that by tracking and planning out a huge number of variables efficiently and easily. The main ones that we need to manage, our main 4 resources: time, money, materials, and people. Materials can be, in this case, building materials of bits of drywall and paint and stuff like that, but it could also be things like server space on a software project, or renting a product license, or something like that. Anything that's like a consumable material. Cool. So that's your main job as project manager, is to manage those 4 resources. Now, you can trade those resources between each other to some extent. If you've got a task that needs to get done faster, often you can put more people on it. if you want to get better materials, often that will cost you more money, right? So to some extent, you can trade these for resources around. So if you do realize that you are behind schedule on a item of your critical path, you may pull resources from one other aspect, convert them into a new resource, like convert dollars into overtime, which means people, and deploy them somewhere else. These are things that you can do. To some extent, generally it's inefficient to do this after the fact. So you want to plan it out, plan all your resources. Doing this on the fly is generally inefficient, which isn't great. And also, sometimes it can't be done. The biggest trap that project managers fall into is assuming 9 women can make a baby in a month. Doesn't work that way, all right? There are some engineering processes which simply require a set amount of resource. There is this process which requires 9 months. Don't care how hard you try, you're not speeding that up, right? So you got to be aware of that. You need to manage your 4 resources, you need to know when you can trade between them, and you need to know when you can't. And that will allow you to improve efficiency and be an awesome project manager. Out of interest, money is often the lowest priority of the resources. It's generally far easier to get things like money out of investors or whatever. You can't get people often. You often can't get materials on short time frames regardless of how much you're willing to pay for them. Just interesting. Most people think money is the most important, and a lot of people in large industry actually have it quite far down the list. All right, what you've looked at so far has been project management at huge scales, building the entire city of Rome, looking at Gantt charts for multi-million-dollar installations. But just like how we looked at the engineering method at huge scale and at small scale, project management methods work at huge scale and at small scale. $100 million projects down to rabbit hutches. A Gantt chart drawn on a whiteboard by hand can often be perfectly fine to achieve your goals. It can be useful as simple as that, or it can be useful at we spent months preparing a Gantt chart for a huge big multi-million-dollar project, and I've seen both done. Here is an example of a very simple Gantt chart. All right. So what you're looking at here is a Gantt chart with 6 tasks on it, a team of 5 or 6 people, and a couple of weeks timeline. This is not that different to your ENGG1500 projects, right? You're looking at 2 weeks, 6 or 7 people, couple of tasks. So you can see how this would have taken 10 minutes to put together. We can see graphically really quickly that something like, okay, we've got some dependencies here. There's 2 different tasks for the design team, and they have to happen one after the other. We can see something like photography is all on Brandon. Really hope he doesn't get sick, because that's a huge project and nobody else can do it apparently. And we can look at some of our other tasks like, hey, the server setup is halfway done. That team is doing great, whereas this team hasn't started yet. And that may be fine. It may not be. But it's a really quick, really easy, really simple way of communicating how your team is going. And something like this, drawn once a week for your ENGG1500 team, could be a top idea to save you time. Okay. Estimation. So, as I said before, Gantt charts are normally attempted to be drawn before you start the project to work out how long things take. Which leads to the huge problem for students trying to do this is, how do you know how long it takes? How do you know how long it takes to put up drywall? Would have you said 2 days, or would have you said 2 weeks? I don't know. I don't know how long it takes to put up drywall. Or how much does it cost to do these particular things? When you're doing project management, you have to put in estimates for this. And then people really count on those estimates later. So this is hugely difficult for inexperienced engineers to do. And you know what? Even at large scale for experienced engineers, it's really difficult. They're guesses. They're all guesses. Some of them are good guesses because you've tried them before and you've gotten them wrong, but they're guesses, okay? So don't think that you're supposed to know the answer to these. You're supposed to try your best to get the answer to these. You get better with the more lived experience you have, and generally what you'll do in this case is call somebody who's done it before and ask them to help you. Hopefully people have been doing good reports, and when you do your project management stuff, and even when you did your first assessment, your 2A report, as you're probably still doing it, one of the questions I ask you is, how long did this take? I ask you that so that next time you have to do a report, you have a number there that you can compare it to and go, okay, I need to budget myself this long in time to do this thing. You can Google these things. Most of this information is publicly available on the web of other people's Gantt charts and stuff like that, and whether they stuck to them. So that's totally possible. And you can also go and get a range of opinions. It's really important for this is to understand how long it might take versus how long do you need to budget it to take. What is the error bar on this? And if you go and ask a few people and you get a few different numbers, that might give you a sense of your error bar, okay? What we're going to do in 1500, because obviously this is pretty much impossible for you to do at the start, is we're going to get you to do these week to week. And that way, hopefully, you're going to get to have a go. You'll probably get your first one pretty drastically wrong. And then you'll be able to go, all right, based on lived experience that I've now got, I can estimate better how long I think the next one will take. You may have got to experience that some of that already with your competency. I asked most people when they were building something for their competency, how long do you think this is going to take you versus how long did it actually take you? That's basically to help start joining these dots. In industry, you'll hear this all the time. You'll ask somebody how long it'll take, and they'll try and work it out in their head, and then they'll double it. Okay? And you'll hear that in a meeting. You'll sit in a meeting, and you go, how long will this take? This will take this long. This is 12 hours, so double it, 24. And that's what they will say to clients in meetings and stuff like that. The industry standard is to work it out and double it. I'm not so great at working things out, so I use a factor of 3 whenever I do anything for any of my project management. All right, this is another Gantt chart. It's a little bit more complicated. Well, it's not too much more complicated, but it has an extra dimension to it that I want to make really clear for you. So, you've got a bunch of tasks in here, and most of these ones on this side that are in blue, don't worry what they are. It doesn't really matter. But there are a bunch of tasks in here that are set up in blue, and these are ones that somebody put some times to with a best guess. All right? And then you see these red ones. So design freeze here, GPM lock, or demobilization of our crane. These ones are ones that have been fixed by something external. So a design freeze is generally because you have a client who says, I want a final design in my hand by this day. So you can generally manipulate the timelines in here however you want. You've got a bunch of tasks. These are all related to getting a design done in some way, shape, or form, and you can kind of mess with their times. And if one runs a little over, one runs a little under, whatever, who cares? This one cannot move, it's external. If we talk about the crane, for example, that's one of these, what they're talking about here is one of those huge big cranes that they use to build like skyscrapers inside of buildings, and that's the day it gets packed up and taken away. Okay? And that's fixed. You're not getting to keep it there for another day because you probably had to get council permits and pay millions of dollars for it, and it's probably booked by somebody else. That crane is going that day. So that one cannot move. All of these, though, just have to work out in such a way that they hit this date. So what I'm getting at here is don't put the cart before the horse. What you want to know whenever you're doing project management are what are our hard deadlines and what are the things where we had to pick a number so we did. Okay? If you're behind on a timeline, is it because some random person made up an estimate and they're just not very good at it and they got it wrong? And maybe that's perfectly fine. And maybe the answer is change the Gantt chart, it's wrong. Okay? But on the other side of it, maybe it's we lose the crane tomorrow. If we don't have this sorted by then, we are totally up the creek without a paddle. We need to redeploy all of our resources to get to that. Okay? So understanding which one you're in, super important. Because what you don't want to do is rush through something to fit a timeline that didn't matter and produce a really bad or really expensive result when it wasn't important. Inversely, you also don't want to get behind on a timeline where it's like, no, we need to go by now. So, for example, this for you is test day. Test day is in week 12. It will not move. You must be ready to go. Versus you might set some internal things going, oh, we'd like to be up to here by week 9, but maybe we can actually do a heaps better job and just be up to there by week 10. Maybe those timelines are flexible. Yeah? So be careful. It'll happen more and more as you get out into industry. People will let decisions be driven by incorrect assumptions rather than by hard data. Yeah, so sometimes these are hard rules, and sometimes they should just be a trigger point to go, we're behind on this. Why are we behind? Let's sit down, have a quick meeting, reevaluate, move some goalposts around, see that we're doing okay. Cool. Some good thought processes to help you plan. This is rules of thumb from industry. How long will something take versus how long do we have is a really good thing to know. So sometimes your timelines will be dictated by we've got a hard date here, we have to be finished by then, and sometimes they'll be, well, how long is it going to take? How long is a piece of string? Some good rules to work on is a 25-50-25 rule, which is 25% planning, which is kind of where you're just starting with your ENGG1500 projects now, doing conceptual design and scoping and that kind of jazz. 50% doing, building, programming, constructing, whatever. And 25% finishing, assembling all the bits that all the team members did independently into one, testing that it works, doing quality assurance, and doing demonstrations. Yeah, so that's a good rough guideline. Again, these would certainly not be hard points. They'd just be triggers to have conversations. If we convert that into ENGG1500 stuff, you could do your planning in your weeks 5 and 6, build in 7, 8, 9, do your finishing in 11 and 12, 10 and 11, and final demo in 12. It's kind of a reasonable thing. There's a mid-semester recess in there as well. Make use of that. If you're not sticking to that, you should probably be meeting as a team and going, well, if we're not sticking to this, we need to have a good reason why and a much more detailed plan. Cool. Couple of extras real quick before we finish up the project management side of this. So some things that can really help or hurt you, so you want to be aware of them, is lead times. So some things, whilst it might only take you a day to do this, there might be a huge lead time getting up to that. And that can cause huge differences in something like price. So I buy a few tens of thousands of dollars worth of parts every year from AliExpress. This is electrical parts like robot kits and sensors and STMs and all that kind of stuff. Cost me next to nothing comparatively. If I was to buy them from somewhere like a local supplier like JCar, whilst I can drive down and I can pick them up within 15 minutes from the uni to JCar, 15-minute car drive, no lead time, roughly 10 times the cost. The sensors that I buy cost just over, on average, 10 times as much from JCar as they do from AliExpress. What are lead times on AliExpress? Generally 3 to 6 months. I bought some stuff 3 months before semester started this year, and it did not arrive by week 3 when I needed it. Anybody who was in the robot project would have been acutely aware of that, yeah? I gave myself 3 months for something that should have taken 6 weeks, and it still wasn't ready on time. So that was lead times getting me there, right? And it could get you as well. If you need to buy materials, buying them from Bunnings is generally not the cheapest thing to do, but it's generally fast, although comparatively fast. If you've got 2 hours in a workshop and you realize you ran out of material and you have to drive to Bunnings, buy some and drive back, and you just wasted 45 minutes of workshop time, that could be real bad, right? And maybe you want to buy some extras. You have lead times on people. Getting a fresh person in and upskilling them into being a good team member and having all the technical knowledge that they need to have takes a long time. You just finished writing an assessment task on upskilling a new team member, right? So you can consider how long that can take as a resource. Money can have a lead time. If you need to get money to do something, a couple $1 million of investment to build something, it takes time to get that money and get access to it. And time can have it doesn't really make any sense, right? All of these things are basically trading other resources for time. But what you're supposed to be doing here is thinking about your timelines. When do you need to start stuff in order to get it done on time? What is the thing where you have to go, I need to place an order on this day desperately, but then I'm going to have to wait 3 months for it to arrive, and then I'm going to have to desperately work again once it arrives. So you've got to manage that time appropriately. So lead times is one thing. The other thing is dependencies, and I've sort of mentioned these. I just wanted to make sure I addressed it specifically. Dependencies are where one thing needs to be finished before another thing can start, or something like that, or at least this has to be started before this can start. Or this thing has to finish before this thing can start. Don't worry, I said that, sorry. You stack all your dependencies up, And then you get things that are called critical path. So that's this has to happen, then this, then this, then this. And that's the trail that makes up the minimum length of the project. It's critical path. That's the name for it. Anything that's not critical path generally can happen with a little bit of float. Like if this happens in 3 days or 4 days or 5 days or 6 days, it doesn't really matter because there's something else that's more important that's going on. That particular task might have a couple of days of, it's called float. It could happen whenever it wanted, or it could get stretched out by a little bit. It has X days of float. It's just the term so you know what it is. To be aware of with dependencies is important but not urgent, or urgent but not important. Just because you have something on your critical path, it might be small, it might not be that relevant, it may not be that important. Whereas you can have other things and they might have float in them, and that can lead to people just never starting them. Because you can do it whenever you want, nobody starts on it. And it actually, these things that originally started with float can become critical path. And if they're really important, and by important I guess I mean difficult, maybe you want to start them really early, even if they're supposed to have float, just in case they turn out to be way harder than you thought, or way more work. This is something we see with pre-recorded lectures online all the time. As soon as you say you can watch this lecture whenever you want, people find it really hard to find the time to watch the lecture. If you say, this is your lecture slot, show up, more people actually watch lectures if you dictate a time for them than if you let them watch whenever they want. And it's an important but not urgent thing that happens. All right, just to sort of finish this up on, to help you, you're not going to be the person making multi-million-dollar Gantt charts, right? That's not going to be your job for at least 10 years. But you will be one of the cogs in that machine. So somebody will be putting a Gantt chart together when you get out of here, and you will be filling one of the roles. If you have the ability to see this from the helicopter level and understand how you fit into the whole network and what that person at the helicopter level is trying to juggle at the time, then you'll be able to do it really efficiently. You'll be able to understand, okay, at the moment, they care most about time. That's their most important resource at the moment that they're managing. I can ask for as much money and as many people as I want on my team, as long as I can say to them, if you give me $1 million and 20 people, I'll get this done 2 days earlier. And they might go, great, that's amazing. Whereas if you've got a task to do and you have float in your task, they don't care if you can do it a day earlier. They don't care if it takes you a day longer. Maybe you can go, hey, I could do this with half the number of staff, but it'll take me 1 extra day. Maybe they're going to love you for that, right? So if you see how you fit into the big picture, you become a far more useful employee, and as a result, you can ask for far more resources and thus make your life easier. So communicate to that person who's at the helicopter level when you're at the ground level. That'll help everybody out. Also, this is why scoping is important. We scope things such that we understand what our puzzle piece is and how it fits into all of the other puzzle pieces. So in 1500, you're going to do weekly milestones. Every week, we're going to ask you to write down a task that you're going to complete by next week. We're going to talk about this more in a couple of slides when we do assessment stuff, but that's basically what we're going to get you to do. You're going to need, as a team, to manage your entire project, and you're going to do it through this series of weekly milestones. Every week, you're going to meet with your client, just like you would in industry, all right? You'll have common meetings with a funder or a client or whatever in industry, and you'll report to them of our project. This was our milestone by this week. This is where we're up to on it. You will need to do this. Each team member will need to have at least one milestone that they will be in charge of. When you're sitting there trying to plan this type of stuff out and communicate with your client or your workshop leader or whoever it is, maybe smashing out a quick Gantt chart once a week and saying these are the 4 things that we're going to do. Bob's thing relies on Jane's thing, so Jane has to finish by Saturday, so Bob can finish his by Monday, so Julie can do hers by our workshop. Great, that could be a really useful thing for you to do. So understanding some of this project management stuff will help you in 1500, but we're going to do it in a super scaled down way. Cool, so that is project management. Now we get to jump into assessments. So this is going to come across in 3 or 4 parts. Three parts. Three parts. We're going to talk about assessments in three parts. We're going to talk about them in general. So, what type of stuff do I want you to understand about assessments as a student at university? Why do I set assessments the way that I do? How do you get the most out of them? Then we're going to talk about your next two assessments that you're actually going to be issued in ENGG1500, which we've already started talking about some of them, but we'll talk about them in some more depth. But just to get you, let's roll you back a few steps. Let's put you in my position when I was writing up the assessment task for ENGG1500 all the way back at the start. What did I want them to do? I wanted them to be centered around your project. So I don't want you to do an assessment that's totally unrelated to your projects very often, if at all. I also wanted to work on your communication skills. They were my two main goals. So your assessments are going to help you develop your communication skills, and most of them at least are going to be centered around your project. I also wanted the assessments to build on each other. I don't want your assessments to be totally isolated events. I want doing one to help you do the next one to help you do the next one. It's why your first quiz that I made you do had some questions about being prepared for your first workshop, right? It helps your workshop, it helps your project. Your report that you're going to write, if you do a good job of this report, you're going to be able to take stuff out of it and put it straight into your final report at the end of the year. They build on each other. Okay, they're not discrete elements. I would say in all of ENGG1500, by far the hardest assessment is starting the first report. That is the thing that people find most difficult. And most of you, I hope all of you, considering it's Saturday afternoon, have already started your first report. And trust me, getting those first couple pages out, that's the hard bit. Everything else from here, because it builds on that, will get easier and easier and easier and easier. All right. That's my logic. That's how I wanted to create these assessments. What I basically wanted was this formula to fall out of 1500. Good project work multiplied by how well you communicate it equals your final marks. If you can't do one of these two things, you can't get the marks, all right? You need to be able to do both. I wanted this to rely on both things at once. Because that's how it is in industry, all right? You need to be brilliant at the project, but you also need to be good enough at communicating it in order to translate it into success. Cool. So, to take you through your assessments in 1500, you've done your first quiz, you've done assessment 1. You've virtually finished assessment 2, your first report, right? And it's due Monday of week 5 at 5 p.m. Live stream tomorrow morning, Sunday tomorrow morning to go through some of them. Your next assessment task, at least according to the course outline, is assessment 3, which is in week 7, and it's going to be a quiz. So it's going to happen in the live stream spot. So Tuesday 8 to 10 of week 7, you will have a quiz. And this is going to explicitly address communication skills. So a bunch of the things that we've already kind of looked at, which is like some formatting rules that we saw in the week 4 lecture, a whole bunch more formatting rules that you're going to see in the week 6 lecture. We'll probably get you some content to read through, and then we'll get you to say, okay, what was wrong with this paragraph, or what was good about this paragraph, or how could have this been done better, or here's a figure, how should have the caption been formatted on it, or whatever. Okay, so this is all the stuff that you saw a bunch of it in week 4, you're going to see a bunch of it in week 6, you did a bunch of it in your middle report, and it's just to sort of explicitly reiterate that type of content for you is going to be your quiz in week 7. You're also getting today, so that is officially being released today, there's a slide on it, don't worry about it. Also, you're going to start these weekly meetings with your client. Okay, so that's assessment 4, and it's a series of meetings once a week with your client between week 5 and week 11. We're going to talk about that as well. The other assessment tasks in 1500 is project testing in week 12, so you will demonstrate your project during your week 12 workshop. You'll then have a week to finish. You can start this before your project testing, but you can finish your final report week 13. And in your workshop in week 13, we're going to get together and do reflective practice. So we're going to come back in and do lessons learned as a team in week 13 in your workshop. Okay? So this is the assessment tasks for everybody in ENGG1500. Unless your education, this is going to be a little bit different because you're going to be on placement. But For everybody who's not education, this is how ENGG1500 assessment tasks run. I understand that the banner in Blackboard is still broken. Don't worry about it. Here's an actually useful slide for you. This is very deliberately loading you up right here, yeah? And then there's this big gap until the end. And the idea is heaps of assessment here, then let you work on your project up until week 12, and then a big hit at the end of week 12 and week 13. And then that's it. No exam, right? So after week 13, a bunch of your other courses, you're going to want to prep for an exam. You're not going to have to worry about 1500 anymore. It will be over. So there's a big hit of work here to make sure you can finish the course and it can be done, and then you can go and focus on your exams. Cool. So back to looking at kind of conceptually assessments. This is, again, more broadly than 1500, how to get the most out of assessments at university. In general, I teach you things because I want you to be good at them, and I assess you on things so that you can improve at them. That's my goal of an assessment, is that you do it and you are smarter as a result of doing it. It's not to necessarily figure out how much you know. It's not to necessarily, certainly not to rank you amongst your peers. That is totally not why I issue assessment tasks. I don't care about that. I care about setting you a task that when you do it, as a result of that, you will be a better engineer in the future. That's my goal for an assessment task. And that is slightly different to some of the assessments you will have done before in your life. It also means when I give you an assessment task and I give you feedback, I critique you on it, not to tell you when you did well, because telling you the things that you did right doesn't help you improve. I do it so that you go, okay, these are the things that I need to get better at in the future. So again, I can become a better engineer. All right, that is how I personally look at assessment tasks, and it's how I believe all assessment tasks should be set. You should be smarter for doing them. And you shouldn't be getting feedback on things that you did well. You should only be getting feedback on things, not only, but you should largely be getting feedback where you can improve. It's also why I'm doing a live stream tomorrow before your report is due. Because telling you the information about it after it's due, you're not going to action that. But telling you it before it's due, you'll do something about it, right? So it's much more useful for me to brutally analyze something and red pen all of it the day before something is due, because it'll actually make you learn more. Whereas writing feedback onto assignments and handing them back to you 2 days later is not that useful. So we don't do very much of that in 1500. Cool. So whenever you do get an assessment, and you will have already noticed this from me, sometimes they will be kind of ill-defined. And that's totally intentional. It's your job as an engineer to solve the problem and to answer the question. We often won't have a very well set out prescribed question because that's just not indicative of reality, right? So we're generally not looking for you to memorize something and just spit it back to me. Not particularly useful. What I want to do generally to an engineer is teach them a whole bunch of stuff and then throw them a problem they've never seen before and see how they decide to use the skills that they have learned to tackle that problem. So if it's a problem they've seen before, that becomes a pretty useless experiment, right? So I love throwing engineers questions they've never seen and saying, figure it out. It's difficult. It requires interpretation. It's hard. It's a high-level skill. But, this is university. It's all about high-level skills. And when we do this, it also means that we can mark generally quite generously, because we can say anything that you've done that made some progress towards this goal is something we can give you marks for. Whereas if we're very prescriptive about the way we set assessments, and then we're very prescriptive about the way you're meant to solve them, even if you get it right but you don't use my method, wrong, bad. That's not, in my opinion, the correct way to set assessments. Some good things for you to be able to do is sanity check your answers, all right? In engineering, most of the time when we give you a problem, the answer will be reasonable. So if we did a projectile motion example and we calculated how far Dylan could throw a ball, and the answer came out at 800 kilometers, what would we do? Well, we might, particularly in an exam, write down the number that we got because it's an exam and we don't have time to do much else. But under that, I would be writing, this seems entirely unreasonable. I've seen Dylan throw and he definitely cannot throw a ball that far. I know that my answer is wrong. I would come back to it if I had more time and try to work out what it was. Yeah? That's a great high level skill for you to have. Awesome. So another thing that will help you at university is being able to have a little bit of what I call marker empathy. If you've never marked 600 assignments, which I am assuming you never have, it's very difficult for you to put yourself in the shoes of a marker. But that's the person who you need to understand if you want to do well. So there are over 600 of you. There's almost 700 of you. And based on, because I know I asked you this in your first report, how long did you spend? Most of you spend between 10 and 20 hours. I think the average is like 12 and a half, 13 hours that people spend on this. And that's dragged down by some people who spend less than one. They don't do so well. So you've spent 20 hours of your life on this, right? Let's say, for the purposes of argument, that I spend 20 minutes marking something you spent 20 hours on. Is that fair? 1 minute of my time for every hour of yours? Seems kind of imbalanced. But let's run the numbers on that. 600 of you at 20 minutes each, a third of an hour, equals 200 hours of marking. If I work 35 hours a week, which is all I'm supposed to work, that would be 6 weeks of solid marking. That would be 6 weeks of me sitting in this chair, not seeing the light of day, not seeing my rabbits or my partner, not making lecture content, not going to workshops, not answering emails or Discord messages, just marking until week, 11. So, you're not getting 20 minutes, right? And regardless of how I break it up, no, I don't mark all 600 of them. I have a team of people marking them, but they're not spending 20 minutes on your report in general. That 20 minutes would be generous for something like this. So, let's say that you're a long way down the list. Let's say that I'm not all full of beans and happy. I've been here for a long time marking. I haven't seen the light of day in a while. How happy do you think I am? How long do you think I want to spend on your report? Because it's not long, right? What can you do? How well can you put yourself in my seat right now? And then, correspondingly, what would you do to your report? How would you make it look if you've now realized that this is the state of the person marking you? You want to make your answers as easy to find as possible, because I'm not going looking for them. Make them be front and center, super easy to digest. Bam, yes, amazing, that's what I wanted to see, that's what I wanted to see, tick, 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 I love this person because they put everything out in front, took me 2 seconds to mark their thing, great, you're going to do super well. And I've got a set amount of time, right? So if you bury some answers and I have to spend most of my time trying to find the first 1 or 2 answers because you've done it in a super complicated or super convoluted way, I now just physically don't have the time to look for hidden answers in the rest of it. So it's going to be, nope, that's not perfectly correct, it's wrong, goodbye. The easier you can make life for your marker, the more marks they're going to be able to find for you in the allocated time that they have. So some things that are going to help you, just be explicit here, be on time, submit stuff on time. Submitting stuff late is an awful thing for a marker to have to deal with because they're like, here is my pile, this is manageable, and then you come in late and it goes on top. Not good, not good. Be nice and legible. I don't want to have to struggle to read your handwriting. My handwriting is atrocious, so you know what I do? I type things up. I don't give handwritten things to people because it was too difficult for them, so I would go to the effort of typing things up, and my marks skyrocketed when I started doing that. Make sure you have a nice, clear workflow, however it is, whether that's in a report or it's in an assignment. Make sure it's nice and it's clear and it's obvious and it doesn't go all over the place. And follow any guidelines that you're given, right? I have some in 1500. I want to see a staple. I want to see a particular text, size, and font. And it's because I don't like having a bright light above me when I mark because it hurts my eyes after 16 hours of doing it straight. So I don't want to have to read little text. That's why I have a minimum text size, right? So if you can't follow those guidelines, you've got to make life harder for your marker, and you're not going to get as many as marks. It's just a harsh reality of the world in which we live, right? But now you know that, you can be really good. And you'll find that your marks will go up massively as a result. Not necessarily massively, but you won't lose marks for no reason. I should say that. And look, I portray this in a very negative light to make a point. In reality, most of us don't spend 16 hours marking, and I do encourage my markers to try as much as possible to read through illegible content. And they do. but most of the time I'll let you know they do it out of the goodness of their heart, not because they're paid to. They're paid to do a set amount of work. If they go find your marks for you, which they do, that's just because they're great people. Okay. In a report, I'll generally gift you your first mistake, by the way, just so you know. The first time you make a mistake in a report, I'll often circle it and correct it, but I will not take a mark off you for it. Few reasons for this. One, reporting's hard and it's your first years and you're going to make mistakes, and it's fine, it happens. Often your workshop leaders will gift you a few because they don't always agree with all of the hard and fast rules that I tell you, and sometimes they'll be like, I don't really care about that rule, and I'm just going to not take marks off for it. So you'll actually find most of your markers will be quite generous on not marking you down for certain things. They might circle it in red, but they won't necessarily take a mark off for it. Where I'm building towards here, just this is a trap for some players, is there are certainly going to be a couple of errors. People will add things up wrong. You'll lose marks and not understand. If that happens, by all means, bring it up and talk to us and say, I don't understand why I lost these marks. Can you help explain this to me? I got 6 out of 10, but there's only 2 red marks on the entire report. I don't understand what happened. And we'll hopefully be able to explain it to you, and that's a great learning outcome. I want you to understand every mark that you legitimately lost. What you don't want to do is come up and say, I lost a mark for this and my friend didn't, I want my mark back. Because that may result in your friend losing their mark. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Or, far more likely, it's because it was your friend's first mistake and it was your second, third, fourth, or 10th. I had somebody come up to me last year and ask me to remark something because they got 7 out of 10 and they wanted 10 out of 10. And they were like, look, I thought it was really good. I was like, oh, yeah, I'll remark it for you, no dramas. And I remarked it. I gave them 3.5 out of 10. I was like, cool. So, yeah, they picked on you for this and this, but it's because they didn't pick on you for these 10 other things that you got wrong before that. They just sort of circled them and moved on. Just be a little cautious. Approach it in the correct way. Come up to your markers and ask, hey, can you help me understand the mark that I got? And you'll generally do really, really well if you approach the problem that way. Awesome. All right, curves. So, there is no curve in university. It doesn't exist and it shouldn't exist. There is this assumption that, again, is perpetuated through high schools and stuff like that, that if you give a fair test to a random cross-section of individuals, they will form a normal distribution, as in most people get a mark around the middle, some people do really well, some people do really badly. That is valid, provided it's a fair test and a random cross-section of individuals, of which neither are true in university. You're not a random cross-section of individuals, you're an incredibly specific cross-section of individuals. And I'm not going to give you a fair test, I'm going to have a particular expectation of you, and you're going to meet it or you're not, right? And that may be very easy to meet. And if it is, I wouldn't expect there to be a curve, I'd expect everybody to meet it. So, just as an example, here are some marks from different years of the same quiz, I think it was, in a totally different subject. This has nothing to do necessarily with 1500, but you can see no one of these is a bell curve, and some of them are a long way from that, right? And this thing is peaking up around something really, really high. This doesn't look like a standard distribution in any way, and that's totally how it will go at university as well. So we have certain criteria that we mark to, and if you reach the criteria, then if you meet the expectations, reach the criteria, then that's what you do, and you deserve to get the marks. Just because somebody else reached them more or better than you did, doesn't mean I'm going to force you down that curve just because somebody else was outstanding up the other way. If you do great, then you do great, okay? I give out a huge amount of HDs every year, and I would love to have a year of 1500 where I gave everybody an HD. And every year I give out lots. The curve in ENGG1500 generally looks flat. I give about as many HDs as Ds. HDs are above 85%, by the way. Above 85% as Ds, credits, passes. There's a bit of a tail into fails. And when asked to defend, why did you give so many HDs? My answer is, and always will be, they deserved it. These people showed up 40 hours a week and busted their ass for 1500. I'm giving them an HD because they deserved it, and I will not take it away just because somebody did 90 hours a week, right? You work hard in this course, I will give you the marks. All right. Also, if you don't show up and you don't try, I will fail you, and I'll defend that in exactly the same way. Why'd you fail these people? They deserved it. And you got to kind of work pretty hard at that sometimes in 1500. But show up every single week, put the effort in. We will do our utmost to help you, but don't show up, don't put the effort in, don't expect to pass. But yeah, this is great news for the vast majority of you because it means you can do outstandingly well. One thing to keep in mind when you're at university is you're in a room of people who got into engineering, which means they have the room itself, this 700 people that I'm addressing right now, has an average ATAR of 90 something, right? So if you got 90 something ATAR, you would expect to be middle of the pack now in the current room. Yeah? Does that make sense? The size of the pond has changed. When you were in high school, you may have been a big fish in a small pond. Now you're in a pond where everybody is big fish. So people go, oh, I got 90s all through high school and now I'm getting 70s. I'm like, well, yes, that's how the maths works out, right? It's just some maths that not everybody acknowledges that they should be doing. I just thought I'd point it out. Look, this is just something real quick. I'm not reading all of this. There is a university policy for what happens if you do late submission and adverse circumstances, and there is a university policy for plagiarism. You should be aware that both exists. What I will tell you is a couple of just really quick important points. Adverse circumstances does not equal an extension of time. It can. You can have adverse circumstances and you can be granted an extension of time, but that's not necessarily how this goes. Extensions are generally bad, to be honest. From my opinion, giving somebody an extension of time is often a bad thing to do for them, particularly in 1500, because there's other work to come and it just delays the pain instead of removing it. So I would generally, if you have adverse circumstances, talk to me. I'll try to reduce your workload, not just delay the pain. If you can do it early, if you can do it a couple days, a couple weeks in advance, we can almost always find really good and successful workarounds for people. And we've already done it for a few people in 1500. Don't leave it to the end and say, oh, I was sick on submission day. Can I have an extension? Because we'll be like, no, submit what you have. Just one thing that some people might want to be careful of is sharing stuff on Discord for plagiarism. By all means, talk to your teams and stuff on Discord, but be very careful sharing anything that would be an official university assignment because it is a public platform and that could be considered plagiarism. If you are unsure, at me, ask me, and I'll tell you. My final thing that I want you to take away about assessments in general is for you to learn more about, to worry more about how much you're learning than what mark you are getting, particularly in first year. Your WAM and stuff isn't calculated on your first year marks. They don't matter that much. What matters is how much you learn so that you can smash second, third, and fourth year out of the park. Okay? That should be your goal. All right. We're going to talk about the two assessments individually now. We've covered most of this, so I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly. Assessment 3, this is the quiz that I was talking about before. It's going to happen after the break. So although it's 2 university weeks away, it's actually 4 weeks away in reality. After the break, in the week 7 live stream, 8 a.m. Tuesday morning. All of you should be free in that time. I know the medicals have a clash, however, and I will come and I will talk to you and we will sort that out. The quiz will cover report writing skills, specifically the stuff from week 4, week 6 lecture, which you'll get next week, the live streams around those lectures, and any feedback from assessment 2, either pre or post submission. You may get given a document to proofread a little bit before that assessment starts, and that's just so we can help with a little bit of time management. There'll be questions similar to what we've talked about in live streams. You've seen this type of content before. More info will be coming on it, but I don't want you to worry about it now. Stop wasting brain cells on it. It's a month away. We've got other things that we need to focus on now. If you're worried about it, watch the lectures. They will contain all of the lectures and the live streams will contain everything you need to know for the assessment. Keep up to date with lectures and live streams. You'll be fine. Don't worry. The only thing you need to do is make sure you're going to be available that day. Again, medicals and stuff, we'll talk to you about it. Don't stress. Okay, assessments. Now we're going to talk about your weekly milestone assessment. So we've spoken about most of this already, so I'm going to blow through the stuff that we've already covered. Our workshop styles are changing. It's going to be less railroading. You have to sit here and listen to us for an hour. It's going to be more go and solve your problems. And we're going to become encouraging and supportive workshop leaders. This means you're going to get the freedom to ride without training wheels, and we're going to let you fail whenever you need to. You will need, however, one of the things we will prescribe is every week I want every single person to have a milestone that they will achieve by next week, and then you'll come in and you will show that to your client. This is why we had to talk about teamwork today and why we had to talk about project management today, so you have effective skills behind you to break your project up. Oh yeah, okay, so we're going to try this. This is one way of doing project management. You can use it forever in your life if you like it. If you don't like it, never use it again. I don't care. Okay, we're going to talk for a couple of minutes, and I understand that this lecture is probably going to exceed the 2-hour mark by a little bit, but that's okay. You can watch it possibly on 1.25 speed if you need to get it done in 2 hours. So let's talk about milestones really quickly. I'm going to do this generally from a bit of a broader perspective and then tie it into 1500 specifically. So, did any of you make a New Year's resolution? I didn't this year because of a great CGP Grey video I saw on themes instead of resolutions, so I made a theme this year, and it's been useful because every resolution I've ever set in my life has been a total waste of time. I failed every single one of them. If you've ever made a resolution, if you've ever heard, people make the standard resolution, I'm going to get really fit and run a marathon, and the gym's full of people for a week, and then it's dead empty again, yeah? But this is important. So the lesson we want to take out of here is starting with a goal to run a marathon. Terrible idea. Well, it's not a terrible idea. You can start with a goal to run a marathon, but you need to break that up into smaller measurable tasks that you can do week to week or day to day or whatever. And then you want to bring those tasks together to create milestones to hit along the way. You don't go from fat slob on the couch to running a marathon. So milestones in our case, I'm going to use this terminology. This thing called a milestone is going to be defined by a few things: a time limit, so a due date, a specific event that has to happen by that time. It has to be a specific thing. I'm going to do this by this time, and an individual responsible. Okay, so who's going to do it? When they're personal milestones, obviously it's you, but when it comes to your project, you'll split stuff up and different people will be responsible for it. So we want to run a marathon. We might start with a milestone, which is I'm going to run 1 kilometer without stopping. So that's the specific event, right? It's very specific. This is exactly what I'm going to do. I will complete this within 7 days. Great. We have a timeline. We have a due date. We have a person responsible. Pat Harper was one of my old workshop leaders. He came up with this example, and I think it's brilliant, so I left him in here. And this is kind of a bit of a bonus. Requirements. What is required to do this? Well, you may need to have a pair of joggers, and if you don't have them, you may not be able to start. What resources do you need to be successful? So, this would be a great milestone. But let's talk about doing this a little bit more to create robust and useful milestones. So, you'll see a lot of stuff goal setting and milestone setting and stuff like that. How do we make milestones that are useful for us? Well, we want to make robust milestones because things are going to happen that gets in our way. So right now, if I set that milestone, it's Saturday, it's pouring 100 mil of rain today, it is flooding in my house. My garage is currently a water feature because it's got a stream running through it. I'm not going for a run today. I'd love to, but I'm not going for a run today. I'm going to drown in a flood. This is an upset condition, right? So is it still... If I've set this milestone, am I still required to go through with it? Is it you need to do this come hell or high water, or where is a reasonable upset condition to say, all right, let's not do that milestone at the moment? If you've given yourself some time, maybe you can wait a couple of days. The rain will go away by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Remember, we had a week. Provided we start early, we can get over some of these upset conditions. All right, so a robust milestone will give a time frame in which something has to be done, but it should be a task that has a bit of float in it. Yeah. What about the other side of this? Say I get hurt. Say I stand up at the moment and I don't know, roll my ankle and I can't run. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to pass this milestone. But if we make sure that we've set good, robust milestones and they're useful, we should know what's our end goal here. Our end goal is to run a marathon. I'm running a mile or a kilometer so that I can improve my fitness level. Yeah. There are other ways to improve my fitness level other than just running. So potentially, if it's flooding, maybe I can go swimming instead. Maybe I can get there as well. So a robust milestone might have the overall objective of improve fitness through running a kilometer. But if we hit a particular upset condition, maybe we can still achieve the goal in a slightly different way. All right. Another thing about making our milestones useful is it's the middle of March. If I'm struggling to run 1 kilometer without stopping by the middle of March, am I going to make a marathon by the end of December? Not at all, right? So what this is an inadequately trivial milestone. A lot of people will say when you're goal setting to set achievable goals. Well, yeah, running a kilometer without stopping is achievable, and you'll certainly do it within a week, and everything will be great, and it's not actually helping you achieve your long-term goal, right? If these things are so trivially easy, you can tick all the boxes, but it's not necessarily useful, right? So you've got to learn where to put that boundary. How challenging do you make this thing in order to succeed, in order for it to be useful? So this again can be a scenario where people will put the cart before the horse. They'll go and they'll push through a particular milestone even though it wasn't super the right thing to be doing at that time and place. Or they'll set these really trivial milestones going, but I ticked all my milestone boxes. I don't understand why I'm so behind in the project. It's like, well, because they were too trivially easy or because they weren't actually addressing the major goal. Measurable and achievable don't necessarily mean useful. Cool. Awesome. The other super important part with milestones is deliverables. Now, less important when they're your own personal milestones, because you'll know the answer to this. But when you're working in teams or working with clients and you have to do a particular task, what does completion of that task look like? For example, if you're working with a team of people and they said your job was to run a kilometer without stopping, how would you go into a weekly meeting the next week and prove that you did that? Would your answer just be, oh, trust me, I did it? Maybe they wouldn't believe that. Or inversely, if it was, write some piece of code. Oh, yeah, I've wrote it. It's on my computer at home. That's not useful to the rest of the team, right? So generally, we want our milestones to have a deliverable, a thing you can plonk on the table and prove to everybody that you did the thing, and it can hopefully be useful to your team and your bigger project. So some things here that we could do, maybe we can plot it with our Fitbit. Maybe that's an option. We plot our run, and that's definitely a thing that you can do with Strava and all that kind of jazz. Maybe they could physically be there. You could do this thing as a team, and then everybody could agree, yes, we succeeded. Or you could have somebody externally validate it, like, you could go into a competition or a fun run or something. These are just some examples of ways that you could prove a fairly immeasurable milestone. The other side of deliverables that's really important is to make sure that they are unambiguous. So we said we're going to run a kilometer without stopping. Say I slowed down to a walk for some of that because I was struggling. Is that okay? I didn't stop as in stop. I just slowed down. Would you consider that acceptable or not? Or what if I sprinted and then paused and sprinted the rest of the way? Would you consider that acceptable? Our wording was a little bit ambiguous. We don't know whether this would be acceptable or not, right? And you may think it's fine to slow for a walk for a little while, and your client may think it's not. And now we've got a law battle on our hands, and we don't want that. So you want to generally try and develop success criteria that doesn't leave room for interpretation. Okay? Really, really clear success criteria, and thus really clear expectation of what the deliverables are going to look like really helps when we're setting milestones. You want to agree to this beforehand. You don't want to show up with Fitbit data of you stopping and walking for a little while, and then your client turn around and go, well, I don't accept either of those things. When you set your milestone, you need to be thinking about what your deliverable is going to look like, okay? And whoever you're setting it with, whoever you have that contract with, whether it's your team members or it's your client, you got to agree on what it's going to look like. And then you should be fine. You should have none of these dramas. Communication, Fundamentally important to doing this successfully. Sweet. So what are we going to get you to do? For your projects to complete them and for your assessment 4, which is going to be these weekly milestones, you're going to need to manage your own project, and you're going to have in your workshop, your team is going to meet with your client, who may be your workshop leader, or they may be an actual industry client, for 10 minutes each week. At which point, you're going to have to present to them what you've been doing for the week and all of your deliverables that you said you would do. Your client will then give you some feedback. Yes, that's good. No, I don't accept that one. You need to change direction here. And then you will set your milestones for the following week, and they will hopefully come through and be able to go, yes, I agree to all of these. What are your deliverables going to look like? No, I don't accept that. Yeah, make it look like this. All good. So that's what's going to happen in your workshop. You're going to have this 10-minute meeting every week from week 5 onwards. When you set your milestones, every team member needs to get at least one. So each team will need to set N milestones, where N is your number of team members. You can set more, and you can have more than one person on certain milestones, and that's fine, but everybody needs to be in charge of one of them. You've always got to have a deliverable, and we've got a format that I'm going to show you in a second. Maybe making a quick Gantt chart could be really useful for you each week, just to keep everybody on track, particularly if milestones have dependencies, like I can't start mine until you finish yours. You will also have some client set milestones. So every now and then your client will come in and say, I want to see this particular thing done by this time. I want to see that you've purchased all the materials for your build by this time. I want to see that you're interacting with the server, or you've uploaded this type of code by this time. And your team is required to make that happen. All right. Now, you may need to take that big task that your client gives you and split it up into 4, 5, 10 milestones and do them bit by bit. Whatever, that's up to your team. Or you just put one person on it and they smash it out. Don't know, don't care. But your client will be able to set things for you to do as well. If your client sets a milestone, you don't necessarily have to set an independent one that week. You might just, your job might be to do that milestone. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so here's the template. This is in your assessment 4. This will be on Blackboard probably tomorrow or Monday when I finish updating it. But here, it's just a quick template, all right? So it's going to ask you to name your task, name who's responsible for it. You can have more than one person in there, but you've got to have one person who carries the can. Write down how many hours you think it's going to take you. Write down any resources that you think you're going to need to do it. Any other tasks that need to be finished first, and when it needs to be done. So that won't necessarily be your next workshop. For some of them, it'll just be, it needs to be done by our next workshop. But for some of you, it'll be, I have to get this done by Sunday so that Jane can start hers to get hers done by the workshop. So you might have your own imposed due date there. You put a quick description in, and you put in what your deliverable is going to look like. So all of this you do say in week 5, in preparation for week 6. And hopefully you can get your workshop leader to agree with what your deliverable is going to look like. Then you go and do that task over the next week. And then you have a deliverable to bring in, and you come and you fill out the bottom part of this, which is just going to basically say, what's your deliverable going to be? Do you have it? Did you have any general comments? Did you learn any lessons? Did you get anything unexpected? Like, well, yes, we did this. It worked well. We learned that it takes longer to do tasks than we first thought it was. We learned that this thing that we thought would be hard was actually really easy, but this thing that we thought would be easy was super difficult. And we need to modify some part of our project moving forward from here because we learned something, right? And how long it actually took. And then I just want you to measure how long it actually took versus how long did you estimate it to take. Because you're going to be really bad at estimating when you start, and that's fine. And hopefully each week you can get better at that process. So this is going in your assessment outline. You can print them or you can fill them out on digitally or whatever, but each person gets at least one of these every week. We've spoken about this a fair bit already, but just to reiterate a few things, what can a deliverable look like? It could be physically a thing that you plonk on a table. Dunk, here is the thing that I made that I said I would. It might be code. If it's going to be code, it's probably code you want in your Discord chat, okay? You definitely don't want it on your computer at home. It would count if you got it in Discord. It would count even more if you got your code either uploaded onto an STM or onto an app. That would be even better again. You'll have about 90 seconds each to do this because you only get 10 minutes with your client tops. So you got to be prepared to give that deliverable, right? It's got to be kind of, ready to go. I think we covered this in pretty good depth. It needs to be a deliverable that's acceptable by your client. I think we've already spoken through that. Some extra things is your week 6 deliverables will probably need to be delivered online. So it's a little bit annoying that you're going to set milestones in week 5 and then your week 6 ones will be online and then your week 7 ones will be face to face. But the reason is week 7 has Good Friday, which means there's 8 classes that are going to not have a class because of Good Friday. There's a maths quiz, which is going to affect like another 5 or 6 classes. And there's a chance that the uni will, I don't know, flood again or not be open by Monday or something like that. So, whatever, another act of God or whatever happens. Plus, this is a key skill for engineers, right? So we transitioned, of course, to online last year, and everybody had to start doing online milestones, and we had to kind of change the way that we thought about it. And as an engineer moving forward, you're going to have to learn how to do deliverables as online things. So in the very first week, maybe your deliverables will be less things you plonk on a table and photos or videos or uploaded code or something like that you can either chuck up in a Discord or put on or display on Zoom, all right? So preparing your deliverables both in person and as online deliverables will be important. How this will be assessed. So your team meeting with your client each week, your main job is to convince your client you're making adequate progress towards your project. That is the number one goal of the meeting. It has aspects to it, but that's the number one goal. We want you to ask, has your team achieved all client set milestones? Did your client give you something to do this week and have you done it? Did you set your own milestones and have you achieved all of those? And if you haven't, and occasionally you're not going to because you set a poorly worded milestone that was actually way too much work for you, do you have a good reason why you didn't succeed? And that might be acceptable, all right? Yes, we failed this milestone because it was way more than we thought, but look how much work we've done. Your client may still accept that. May, don't know, depends on the situation. Can you deliver them to the client within the meeting? So do you have deliverables you can put on the table and prove that you've done it? And can you do that in a timely manner? Because you've got a very short time window with your client. If one person takes 8 minutes to convince them that you've achieved the goal, well, everybody else is failing their milestones, or at least your team is failing its communication milestones. And then you need to set milestones for the next week as well. And provided you've got the time, you'll be able to get them agreed to by your client. If your workshop leader can tick all of these questions, then you will get the marks for that week. If they can't tick any one of them, then you don't get the marks, is essentially how this works. All right, so it's got to be all greens. If it's all greens, then you get the 2%. So you'll get 2% per week, weeks 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Or at least you'll get the best 5 of 6 of them. So the fact that it's the best 5 of 6 is great for you because it means if you do tank a milestone for some reason, that's okay. That's going to happen every now and then. It's okay. You messed one up. All right, it's fine. You can still get 10 out of 10 for this, even with one blotch on your radar. Just don't do it again. Just a quick note, some of these things are going to be individual. Most of this is meant to be fairly individual, but you still need to present as a team. So if your team isn't functioning, you've got to be both functioning as a team and as an individual. Also, your workshop leader has total control, or your client has total control over how they run that meeting or they run that 2-hour session in the room, okay? If they want to run it, the first 10 minutes is going to be a random team each week, or if they want to run it sometime randomly within the 2 hours, you'll get your meeting, or if they want to run it that you're going to get 6 minutes at the start to talk about your milestones, then we're going to run an hour of class, and then right at the end, just before we leave, everybody's going to get another 4 minutes to talk about next week. That's up to them, and you do what your workshop leader wants you to do in this case. They're the client, they're the one paying the bills, okay? So you'll need to be adaptable for that. Cool. Um, the objectives of this assessment, and this assessment is new this year. It is not exactly how we did it last year. It is something I've been improving year to year, and I think I finally have this exactly the way I want it. The objective here is that when you walk in on test day and I put a real client, like a Lockheed Martin representative or a person from DST or some real industry person in front of you, and they treat you like a real team of engineers, you're just going to be like, yeah, I got this. I am all over this. I've been grilled weekly by these people. I know the answer to every question. I've got this beautiful thing, and it is just gonna be awesome. Okay? And I know this works because I didn't used to do this, and now I do it. And trust me, outcomes of students got way better. So if you go back 2 years, we did milestones in week 8. We did it once in week 8, and most people failed it, and they had a really hard time. But got them 4 weeks later, and basically every one of them turned around and went, I'm so glad you grilled me in week 8. I pulled my finger out, and I'm so impressed with how we did by test day. Okay, so historically, I did it once in 2019, and people got way better. I did it weekly in 2020, but it wasn't worth marks. It was just a requirement. We did it through COVID, kept people on track. Again, we saw even better results on test day, again, because of doing this. So now we're formalizing the process, and everybody does it every week. It will allow us, hopefully, to get you to communicate more with your client and potentially end up with more diverse solutions because you can really work with your scope a little bit better. And it will allow workshop leaders to, no guys, you're totally on the wrong track. Those milestones are not what you want to be doing. You need to reset them. So it's just a good formal way for us to do that. It'll improve your communication skills because you're going to have to communicate with a client every single week, which will be good. It'll mean you can try it once. If you get a little bit wrong, you can try it again and get better and better and better rather than just having these one-off hits. You'll get to progressively improve. Same goes for project management. I know you'll screw your timelines up the first time you do it. That's fine. Try it again, try it again, try it again. Hopefully by the time we hit week 12, you'll be awesome at it. We're also going to spend a bit of time training you how to pitch and how to basically do this from an entrepreneurial point of view. If you wanted to make a startup company or something like that, the skills that you're going to gain from doing this are going to be super useful to you. And predominantly, this is actually the major one, is most of you are doing this already. Most of you are already, I'm watching your Discords, right? You're jumping in, you're breaking your problem up into tasks, you're doing bits throughout the week, and you're being ready to go come test day. Or like come workshop day. All we're doing is formalizing that and just gifting you an extra 10% of the course for doing your job. Yeah? So it's a way of rewarding people who are already working hard or who are working hard on their projects. For those of you who are working hard on your projects, this is going to be the easiest assessment you ever do in your life. This is going to be a gift of 10%. All right, so I know we're a bit over time. We are all but done. There is there is a video linked in the description below. This week, during your workshop, you are going to do a design thinking task. You're going to do a divergent design thinking task. What I did last year was I recorded a team doing this so that you can see how a session like this is supposed to run. I would try to be in every one of your workshops and do this live with you, but partly due to COVID and partly due to the way the timetable is stacked this year, I physically cannot do that. So what we did was we recorded that session, and I want you to give it a watch. It's 18 minutes. Watch it before your workshop, and then when we roll out the hour that we've allocated for you doing design thinking, you'll understand how the process is supposed to work. Link is in the video description below. I'll try to be in as many workshops as I can this week to help you with it, but please try and watch that video first. I understand that this was a lot of lecture content today, and I understand that we're doing a live stream tomorrow. I know it's a lot of time, but none of it's particularly difficult, okay? So hopefully it hasn't stressed your brain cells too much, and you'll be able to grab all of this content. Okay, video description below, watch it before your workshop. you're going to do this task in your workshop. It'll make your workshop way easier. With that, thank you very much for another big session. We're done.